Hello, everybody. My name is Kurtis, and I'm here with the Library of American Comics, and you are watching LOAC-TV. In this episode today, we are going to be taking a look at this massive book here, King of the Comics, 100 Years of King Features. And I have a special guest, Jeet Heer, whom I will introduce in a little while. But just before we get started, I want to, just a few housekeeping things. First of all, we have a comment section on both Facebook and YouTube. If you're watching on either of those two platforms, feel free to leave a comment. And if you have questions and such, we'll bring them up during the show and we'll talk about trying to answer your questions or, engage you in conversation. We'd love to talk with you guys. And you can follow us on social media. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. We're on all of those. If you just look up LOA Comics or Library of American Comics, you should be able to find us. Definitely, we appreciate your subscribes here on YouTube. That would be fantastic. We have it's a special day today. And you know why? Today is Dean Mullaney's birthday, believe it or not. And so I thought it would be kind of cool. And if you are watching and you want to say happy birthday to Dean, leave me a comment in the comments section, and I'll be able to pass that on. But we're going to give him a phone call right now to see if we can get him on the line and talk to him. Let's give him a call. See if you can hear this. Oh, let's turn that up.
Hey, Kurtis.
Hey, Dean. Just wanted to wish you a happy birthday. You are live right now on LOAC-TV on our live stream. Happy birthday, Dean.
Well, thank you. Well, it's good to be live and alive.
Live and alive, yeah. How's the weather down there in Florida?
Everything's fine. Hanging out with my friends Terry and Pat. Connie's baking a cake. Dragon Lady's making pizza. And we're going to have a good old time. Great.
There are a few people watching on our live stream right now who want to wish you a happy birthday. Bob Elliott says happy birthday, and Pui McCleary says happy birthday, and also our special guest Jeet Heer says happy birthday to you as well.
So Jeet's here?
Jeet Heer. Well, he can't hear you right now, but I'll bring him. He's our special guest today. Oh, another birthday greeting. Michael Reed. Michael Reed says happy birthday as well.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's nice to still be working on comics at my age.
Awesome. Well, we'll have you back on the live stream in a few weeks to talk with you in person, but I just wanted to make sure that we recognize your special day today.
Thank you very much, Curtis. That's great. Say hello to everybody. So.
No problem. See you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
That was great, wasn't it? Always good to be able to have a cool little moment like that on our live stream. Okay, so what we're going to do here is bring on our special guest, Jeet Heer. Hi, Jeet. How are you today?
Good to be here.
Now, Jeet, you've worked a lot with the Library of American Comics and with other publishers over the years in your kind of comics journalism. Can you give us a little bit of your history? Who are you, and why do you like comic strips?
Good. Well, yeah, no, I've done a lot of books. I think tabulated once, but I've done written introductions to more than 50 books about the history of comics. It's just like a small library right there. But yeah. I mean, it really goes back to I was born in India. My family immigrated to Canada when I was like 5 and a half, and I sort of was English was my second language, and I learned to read through comics. My dad had brought these Indian comics, which are still like very going strong. There's these very famous series of like the history of India in comics.
Oh form. Yeah.
Wow. And so that would have been my earliest sort of comics. But I, like very very early on, partially learned to read through comics, through Peanuts and things like that. And I remember when I was like small, like I really loved even then, like especially it was like 75, 76. So Peanuts was its, I think, in one of its like golden periods. And like I would get the books, but then I'd also want to save the daily strips, so I would cut them out and paste them. And so that was like my earliest. Like I was sort of in some ways making little comics collections, even when I was like little. And obviously like a lot of kids my age got into the sort of superhero DC Marvel thing, and but even then, like when I was interested in Frank Miller's Daredevil when it was coming out, Miller had mentioned he liked Will Eisner, so I started reading the Kitchen Sink Will Eisner reprint. So I always had this interest, and I think a lot of my interest in history was really fostered by this really great book from 1977, the Smithsonian Book of Newspaper Comics, edited by great Bill Blackbeard, who's a collector who's saved so much of this stuff for us, and by Martin Williams, a major sort of critic of jazz and popular culture. And that's like a really magnificent book. Like it's this huge, it's like a mosaic tablet. It's just like this large book, and it has like all the greats. And like one looks at it, and in the perspective of like 1978 when I was reading it, is like you compare like these huge things like Little Nemo, Crazy Cat, the Great Gasoline Alley full color Sundays, and with what's in the comics now, you really see that there is this great lost world. And so that's how I sort of became interested, and would like later do through magazines like Nemo, get more knowledge and more interest. I think it's very interesting that that Smithsonian book. I know for a fact that my friend Chris Ware, the cartoonist, that's where he first saw Gasoline Alley and became interested, and then started to collect Gasoline Alley strips. And also this fellow Joe Mapp, another cartoonist, and Joe was the ultimate collector. He gathered all these like Gasoline Alley Sundays and dailies in pasted up book form, and he showed it to the publisher Chris Oliveris of Drawn and Quarterly, and convinced Chris to do this. And Chris Ware and I were both very interested. So it was really, in a lot of ways, I think that Smithsonian book was the seedbed that really planted the seed for this sort of renaissance of comics reprints. Certainly in my life, and I don't think I'm alone in that.
Oh no, not definitely. I don't think you're alone at all. I remember taking that book out from the library as a kid, just because of the sheer size of it. I was like, wow, I never knew comics could be this big. It was like the biggest book, like format-wise, in comics that I've ever seen. Just wonderful, and it's just like sitting on the floor, turning the huge pages, and it's just such a you enter into such a magical world. And like you said, it's a lost world because you don't get Sunday pages like that anymore.
Yeah, that's right. And I think really with the Smithsonian book, that really planted the seed for later stuff like Pete Maresca doing those large, Sunday books that reprint them. And then even now these sort of, IDW's artist editions, like where you reprint the original art full size. I think the Smithsonian book, as far as I know, I mean, there's a few others that Woody Gullman and others did, but it's the first book that really reprinted these things close to their full size and really reminded people of the glory days of the early 20th century newspaper strips, and that had like a huge kind of impact. Exactly.
Like this one is, we gotta show off like the Flash Gordon books because they're like that. They're so big, and I love them. I love the huge format.
Yeah. Because the size of those early comic strips was a very big part of their appeal. That this was how they were kind of sold. And so I mean, that's basically my history. And I also developed a sort of academic history where I've done a lot of scholarly writing on comics and scholarly teaching. And But I mean, I really, if I were to trace it back, I think the real roots of this are Peanuts, the first comic strip that I really fell in love with, and then the Smithsonian book, which really gave me a sense that there's this great history that's worth recovering. And so, I mean, I think it's very interesting that it really drew me away from that kind of Marvel DC world. Which, I mean, even in the 80s, I was very interested in Frank Miller, and then later Alan Moore, and all that stuff had value. But it really took me to wanting to see the larger history of comics.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. Now, what was your association with the Library of American Comics? Where did you first meet Dean?
Well, I think when he wanted to do Annie, I think that's the first book we did together. He knew that I had been working on academic research on Annie. He called me up, and I was I had known Dean not personally, but through his work, through Eclipse Comics from the 80s, where, like I had been reading much of what he was publishing back then. And so I knew of him as a figure in publishing. But yeah, that's really how we kind of got together. And so, yeah, I did the Annie books, which I'd already done a lot of archival research in Boston University. And what I think makes those books special is that, Harold Gray, the cartoonist of Annie, kept a lot of the original art and kept the proof
sheets,
the proof sheets, and which are the kind of bases. And so we get this really wonderful, crisp art. And then, Dean would occasionally tap me for, I did a Terry and the Pirates introduction, did To the Polly and Her Pal books. And, whenever, I'm always game for whatever he wants me to do. Did I do the Little King? Did I write I think I wrote something on Saglo. Yeah.
I don't remember. Where did my book go? Was it you in this one?
Yeah, Ivan Bernetti did.
Jared Gardner did the introduction for Little King.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Those of you who want this is a good book too. I'll have to do a live stream on this one at some point because it's fantastic.
But, so anyway, I was very interested in the all the kind of history of comics stuff, and newspaper scripts. Along with sort of alternative comics, are really my real kind of main loves. And always, whenever Dean or anyone wants me to write an introduction, I'm always game.
Oh, for sure. Now, we have a comment here from Jeff. He says, "Hi, Jeet. Love your background essays in the Little Orphan Annie books. So informative and interesting." And I have to agree with him on that.
Yeah.
Now, informative and interesting. What is your approach to writing essays like this, like these ones for Annie?
Well, I think that one thing I try to bring to this is maybe a greater level of archival research than people have done in the past. I think a lot of the older strips would have very brief introductions that kind of just based off newspaper articles. But a lot of these cartoonists, they kept their papers, and so Harold Gray kept a lot of his papers, including diaries, letters, and I try to bring that out. And really, I think the letters in particular are very interesting for me because they show how people responded. So in one of the Terry and the Pirates books, I mentioned this woman told a story about how her husband loves Terry and would read it every day, and then he went to the hospital and was in a coma for a week, but she kept pasting it. And so when he came back, she had the Terry and the Pirates ready so he could follow the adventure. That's kind of an amazing story of how deeply committed people were to these daily stories. And so I always try to find biographical connections between the cartoonist and what's in their work. So with Harold Gray, he was married twice. His first wife died tragically very young, and there's a storyline very early in Annie where Warbucks' wife doesn't quite die, but she goes missing, and Warbucks is kind of very torn up and upset. And so I really try to emphasize that kind of emotional connection. Later on in his life, Gray's father died very tragically. He was hit by a train, and then within a year or two, we have Daddy Warbucks kind of reflecting on his father. And so I really I always try to look at what are the facts about a cartoonist's life and how does that show up in the work.
Wow, yeah, very cool. Do you find it hard because we're on 16 or 17 volumes of Annie now? Do you find it difficult the further you go along in the series to oh man, what am I going to talk about now, or what new information can I give?
Yeah, I not so much with the Annie books because first of all, Gray is always responding to the politics of his time. So you can always talk a little bit about in the 50s he has a villain that is sort of like Castro, but also there's a lot of letters, fan letters. And so you always get letters of people reacting to each of the strip, and they're often very controversial, pro and con. And so I think that's very fun and really, and you can kind of, by inference, maybe draw out a little bit how Gray is kind of responding to these letters. If he was accused of being unfair to truckers, by one letter, 6 months later, he'll have Annie picked up by a trucker who helps him. And she says, "Hey, aren't truckers the best? They're really regular folks."
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we talk a little bit about this book, King of the Comics? Now, I asked you what book do you want to talk about, and strangely enough, you picked a book that you actually didn't have a hand in at all, right?
Yes, yeah, I've done a lot of books with Library of American Comics, but I always thought that this King of Comics is a great book for a number of ways. One of which is it's a real successor to that Smithsonian book, in the sense that it gives you like 100 years of comics history and the full range of going from the Yellow Kid and the Katzenjammer Kids at the beginning to Mutts at the end, right? So you get like this sweeping survey. And I think it's a great sampler book, just as the Smithsonian book was. And I think it might have the same role in the future the Smithsonian did. That people will pick up this book and they'll see some like great stuff. I noticed that there's like some a lot of fashion art by Nell Brinkley. And then later, I think Trina Robbins went on to do another book of that stuff. So I think it's a book that also contains a seed of many future books. And I think like people, and I also think it's a real testament in some ways to Dean, since it's his birthday. I'll mention this, because there's it both has a great production value of Library of American Comics. A lot of the strips in here are stuff that he's reprinted in other forms, like bringing up other Polly and her pals, Steve Canyon. And also, I think it's a really interesting book because it's not about one cartoonist, but it's about a syndicate. And it gives you another way to look at the history of comics and think about it, which is that publishers have identities, right? I think people who follow, say, comic books will know, there's a DC house style and a Marvel house style, right? And there's a Marvel universe, DC universe. And in some ways, there's a sort of William Randolph Hearst cinematic universe. There's a kind of is a syndicate. And they published many of the great comics. Like just going from the cover, you can see that they did the Yellow Kid, they did Popeye, they did Crazy Cat, Prince Valiant, so many of these. And I think that like all the syndicates have identities, but it's very hard to see those identities because like many newspapers would take different strips from different syndicates. But once you have a book like this, you can really see what is the sort of King Features identity, and it is a very strong one. The one book that's sort of comparable to this is Herb Galewitz did a book in the 1970s called Great Cartoonist of the New York Daily News and Chicago Tribune.
Yeah.
Those are cartoonists that are very familiar to Library of American Comics. They're like Little Orphan Annie, the Gumps, Terry and the Pirates, Dick Tracy. And when you see all these strips together in the Chicago Tribune canon, you see that, they're all kind of narrative strips. They're all melodramatic. They all have, and there's a real identity. And I think the same is true of King Features, but it's a different identity of a more kind of rambunctious, unruly, anarchic thing. And to really, if you go back to the beginning, you just go forward. Just go forward. Yeah, continue. Go forward. Go forward a little bit more. One more page, I think. Okay, so this is some of the early comic strip characters, and it's all tied to William Randolph Hearst, because what's going on in here is all these comic strip characters are supporting Hearst, who is running at that point for governor of New York. And people will remember William Randolph Hearst as this kind of larger than life press baron who ran all these newspapers, who was involved with politics, and was immortalized by Orson Welles in the film Citizen Kane, which is
right.
And Hearst was exactly that. He was this kind of showman who had to be at the center of attention and really wanted to make his impress on American life through his newspaper chains and become powerful through the newspapers. And one of the ways he did it was through comics. He had grown up, the child of this father who discovered a silver mine, and went to Europe. And in Europe, he encountered Mortz and Moretz, this kind of early German comic strip. And when he grew up and wanted to run newspapers, he brought that idea over to America as the Katzenjammer Kids.
Yeah.
And what we see, and he was a great collector of art. I mean, people who watch Citizen King will remember that in the movie Charles Foster Kane collects all his art from Europe, and Hearst had a real taste for art, and that included a taste for cartoonists. He was like really hands-on in the cartoonists that he picked, and he had a particular style and taste. And if I were to sum it up, at least in the first 2 or 3 decades, he's the cartoonist who loved rambunctious, rebellious humor, the humor of the kind of the ghetto kids in the Yellow Kid who are like just brawling, or Happy Hooligan who's always fighting with the police. Happy Hooligan is a kind of homeless guy and he's fighting with the cops. There's Jimmy Swimmerton's Tigers, and that's like this sort of like Robert Crumb type cat who's like very is always on the make. And so you really get in these strips a sense of like Hearst, who's like a populist who supported the populist program of William Jennings Bryan, like really trying to like bring out these strips that have the kind of rebellious side of America. Here's they're making fun of like royalty, right? Happy Hooligan goes to the British Parliament and falls on the head of the king. So I think these strips really give you a feel for what's going on there. Let me Buster Brown. So after Alcott had created the Yellow Kid, one of the early comic strips, and then he created this Buster Brown, which is supposed to be a little bit more respectable, but isn't really, because Buster Brown pulls these pranks. And this is the early days of strip. The big thing was these kind of rebellious kids who do things, and or rebellious mules. It's really kind of rambunctious. And I mean, I think where it comes through later, a lot of the stuff inspired, the Warner Brother cartoons. Like if you think of Bugs Bunny. Right. And Elmer Fudd, and there's always a lot of dynamite. Things are always exploding. I mean, that's a classic Warner Brothers thing, right? Like like somehow there's always like a stick of dynamite nearby.
Well, and just the rambunctious nature.
A lot of these strips haven't been really reprinted in full, so it's great to have a book that at least gives you a sample, and I hope might inspire future people. Like I think the Katzenjammer Kids. Or Jimmy Swimmerton, these are really good cartoonists. I'll mention Swimmerton, Mud and Jeff again. These two. This is a big sort of theme in the early strips of the sporting life of guys who are kind of like into gambling and going to boxing matches and always getting into trouble and mooching off rich people. And that's very much the world of the cartoonists themselves. Like people like Harriman and Bud Fisher. They were like these kind of. They belong to what's called the sporting life of like kind of like urban life that was very much into like kind of like fun and adventure and baseball games and boxing matches, and that's all in there. And I think the coloring style is also very kind of interesting in these strips. These ones are a little bit more kind of pastel and subdued, aimed obviously at like sort of younger kids. And then you have like the more vibrant kind of circus poster type colors. Swimmerton in particular was who does Mr. Jack, who's kind of like this feline who's always has a roving eye and is trying to pick up the ladies and gets into trouble. Swimmerton was a very close friend with Hearst. They socialized together, and Hearst. He got tuberculosis very early on and was like kind of his doctor said he only has 6 months to live, and Hearst paid for him to go to Arizona, and he lived for like another 70 years.
Wow, that's great.
But and there's also that kind of like West. So I talked about the Hearst cinematic universe. So that's about the early strips. He would mix it. The cartoonists would get together and do a jam. And so this one has like the Katzenjammer Kids, Happy Hooligan. They have the dog from Jimmy Swinnerton. So it's all of them are together.
That's great. That reminds me, I don't think this. You remember that one year, the April Fool's strips, where all of the comic strip artists switch their characters, and
yes, that's right. Yeah,
I love it when that kind of stuff happens.
yeah,
So
yeah, and yeah. So I think it's really nice that they kind of picked a few of those strips just to show how these cartoonists were all interacting.
yeah. So I want to
huh?
let's just go back to the table of contents here, because I do want to say that this book is broken down into 8 different sections, each one of them kind of dealing with a different decade. And so yeah, the beginning, comedies, becoming a little bit more sophisticated, and one of my favorite chapters here is Comics at War. Is very interesting. And then as things move through the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s, so it kind of lays it all out, and it has a different person involved writing each chapter. So we get stuff from Brian Walker, Bruce Canwell, Jared Gardner, Robin Goulart, and then these guys are repeating. But yeah, lots of great stuff here, with a few supplements from a couple other people, including Paul Toomey, who was on the show a few weeks ago. And you said this book being a seed for other books to come. Paul Toomey kind of started his Screwball book by having a section in this book, and then they expanded it to a full book. But each one of these chapters has some writing, heavily illustrated writing to set up the decade that they're talking about, and then after that, it's just page after page of artwork. Just amazing stuff. Just a huge sample of, and these are pages that we've already looked at. And then it gets to the next chapter and it does the same thing. We have a little bit of writing, some very interesting stuff to set up kind of the popular players, the major players at the time, and then page after page of just comics. And it's just unbelievable, the amount of stuff that's in this book. And it is a large format book. It's larger than an 8.5. Oh, there's one of the Nell Brinkleys.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just really great stuff. So we'll take another look through. We'll go through chapter 2 here, so you can get a look.
Yeah.
What's going on here?
Yeah. So yeah, I think there's certain themes that I as a reader and historian kind of picked up on as I was reading this. And one of them is that Hearst was a real poacher. He really liked to steal cartoonists from other publishers.
Yeah.
And you see this, and his kind of style all throughout. So like the Yellow Kid was initially a big hit for Pulitzer. And then Hearst, like famously, just came into New York, bought the New York Journal and, bought out all of Pulitzer's staff, including Altcult, who did the Yellow Kid. And I think for a while there's like 2 Yellow Kids running, each because copyright was kind of obscure at that point. And then, but later on he would do that like again and again, where like, okay, so Roy Crane like really took off with Washtub and Captain Easy, especially Captain Easy. And then Hearst would hire him to do Buzz Sawyer. And then Milton Caniff took off with Terry and the Pirates, and Hearst brought him in to do Steve Canyon, right? And it was great for the cartoonists because like Hearst was willing to spend money. There's a famous line in Citizen Kane where the guy who's the accountant says, "We lost $1 million this year, and we're going to lose $1 million next year." And then the Charles Foster Kane says, "Yeah, we'll lose $1 million the next year, and then the next year. And you know what's going to happen? In 90 years, we'll be out of money." So like here's the attitude. Like I have enough money, like I can lose money for 90 years.
Oh man,
yeah. And so he was really so in the early days, like things like Polly and the Pals. He had a really he really liked. Hearst was a bit of a womanizer, and he really liked good girl art and pretty girls, which you see in Polly and you see in some of these other strips, and I think that's also very distinctive. The other artist that he stole was Hal Foster, where he Tarzan, and he said, he offered him a lot of money to do his own strip of Prince Valiant, right? So that's really I think Hearst's modus operandi, to kind of like just If someone else is like doing good work and is successful, like let's try to make him a deal. And again, I can't emphasize how much this is a great sampler. So you can look in here and you get a little bit of Crazy Cat, a little bit of Polly and her pals, and then you can decide which of the other books you want to get, right? And The Family Upstairs is only partially been reprinted back in the 70s. I think that's a great strip
It's a great strip.
Yeah, that someone should really like do again in a proper form.
I love this one where he's playing with the panels. You playing with the way you read this comic strip. The interaction between the tiers is just fantastic.
It's amazing. Yeah. No, it's well, that's the other thing with Hearst. Like, he really encouraged his artists to be experimental, or if they wanted to be experimental, he was happy to go along with it. So like Harriman, of course, with all those great Crazy Cat pages that are like just like so phenomenal in their sense of design and their innovation. But also Cliff Sterrett with Polly and her pals. Again, the Crazy Cat, because it was like so unusual, they ran it in the art section rather than the comic section. That's why they ran it in black and white. But all the innovation of Cliff Sterrett, and so that was a big kind of thing with him.
There's a great panel. I love those sound effects.
Yeah. I don't know. Always like a lot of color. I think the color of the her strips is very distinctive. There's a real emphasis on like kind of eye-catching bright colors, and whereas I think the Tribune, I feel like those colors are more subdued and more earth tone in some ways. Like
here's another cinematic strip here.
Yeah.
Cinematic universe strip.
Yeah, exactly. They're all together. Like yeah.
With all of the artists doing their own characters in their own panels.
Yeah, that's right. But which is very that in itself, right? Like, because that's Bring Up Father and Barney Google, and then on the side you see all the Felix the Cat,
the Gumps,
Skippy,
and Jammer Kids.
Yeah. Crazy Cat. Yeah.
Paul Perkins. Some of these, I don't even know half these characters.
They're all so old. I think one good thing of the book is it gives you the more obscure strips as well as the famous ones. So you get Crazy Cat, but then you also they had this again, cinematic universe, right?
Look at that.
Yeah. Just like an amazing page where all the Hearst characters are together.
Fantastic. This was for a calendar that was made in 1925.
Yeah.
Some more Nell Brinkley. She's just fantastic. Look at the detail in that.
Yeah. Just lovely and
so great Art Deco, wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead a little bit to.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much we could talk about each section a lot. Maybe go ahead like to the war or to the post-war, because I think that's a really important like kind of shift.
Sure.
Yeah.
We'll do a little quick flip through for people to see. We do have one new comment here. Jeff says, "You guys convinced me. I thought about getting this book for a couple years, and I just now bought a copy online after watching." Great job, Jeff. This one actually, it had a couple of printings, and then it went to paperback. Hopefully you could find a hardcover copy, but if not, paperback should be available to you. It just as good in paperback. The Disney strips. I love talking about these Disney strips as well, because a lot happened with these ones. Mickey, Silly Symphonies, Bucky Bug was one of their first comic strip characters. And then the Silly Symphonies also showcased a lot of their movie adaptations. And Library of American Comics got the opportunity to reprint a ton of the Donald Duck and the Treasury of Classic Tales and the entire run of Silly Symphonies. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Here's Blondie.
Blondie, yeah. Well, I think that kind of like marks this kind of big shift, right? Like, well, in the early days, like Blondie is a kind of flapper, and it has this, low culture aspect. But then it becomes this kind of real suburban strip, and really, is a forerunner for a lot of things like High and Lois and things like that. So it really marks this kind of change in culture and humor. But the other big development, of course, is like the adventure strips really starting to take off in the 30s, and yeah, Hearst again. I think I don't see him so much as an innovator but someone who like kind of steals. But yeah, Popeye, one of their big stars in the 30s, and I really think kind of has that in these strips has that kind of adventure feel to it as well.
Yes,
like it's
for sure.
Between burlesque and
Popeye is a great mix of adventure and comedy.
Yeah, as is Barney Google has that same.
Look at that! That's such a great panel. It's huge.
Yeah.
And the great composition, the details amazing. Yeah. Very vibrant colors. Love it. Henry. Oh yeah, there's some of the Little King.
Yes.
I love this comic so much. There's just so much to love about the Little King.
Yeah, no. You really see the art becoming like sort of more stylized and simpler in the kind of like 1930s, but with someone like Soglo like really taking it off in like very direction,
pushing the envelope.
Yeah. But yeah, Bringing Up Father, which is again, people get a sampler of that, and there's like bigger books as well. This are the great color Crazy Cat pages from later.
And
Screwball, yeah.
Here's Paul Toomey's a little bit on Screwball, and then
which is a real King Features specialty. Like I think they did more Screwball comedy than anyone else, and really shows like where their identity as a syndicate was.
We got a bunch from Milt Gross, a bunch of pages, Count Screwloose and whatnot. Oh, maybe not a bunch of pages, but there's a few. Here's hoping.
Yeah, and this again is it's a great sampler for Paul's book on the Screwball comedy. You can if you read that and you like that stuff, there's a whole other book out there.
So what I love about this book as well is that when you're reading the essay and you come across, let's see if I can find an example. This strip comes to mind right around home, because in the essay, whoever wrote this section, I don't remember, was saying something describing this strip being a bird's eye view, one huge page of a bird's eye view of something going on in the world. And I was like, I've never heard of that. I wish I could see an example. And then you flip a few pages and there it is. There's the example. Every single strip that is mentioned in the essays, there are ample examples so that you can see exactly what they're talking about.
No, it's a very well edited book, and the production quality. I mean, like Dean and I believe Lorraine Turner put in a lot of work for just like the real splendor of all the colors. Dr.
Seuss, his very short-lived comic strip,
which you can already see his style, and actually, like seeing Dr. Seuss in this context, you really see his debt to Crazy Cat and to the Rube Goldberg and the Screwball comedy, right? Like, you really see where he's coming from. So it gives us another way of looking at Dr. Seuss.
I kind of wish he did more of this stuff, rather than going into kids' books, but because this is just fantastic. Oh yeah, and here's some of the adventure stuff. Flash Gordon. Secret Agent X9.
Yeah.
Red Berry. We published one book of Red Berry.
Yes. This is
And then here's a sample of like topper strips and other stuff that made it into the pages just to help take up some space. Yeah,
which is again like stuff that like you don't normally see. Like I think there's even if you think you know the history of comics, there's a lot of stuff in here that like will be new to you. And again, we see the change of the times. Like the early stuff was all humor, and now we get a lot of like melodrama and action adventure, and that kind of illustrational style. Really
so many strips. I've just never even heard of so many of these strips before this book. Radio Patrol, didn't know it. Mandrake the Magician. That's a big one. Okay, let's get on to the war years here. Let's flip ahead. There's just so much to take in, page after page. There's some of the Prince Valiants. Look at that, just beautiful. Just, yeah, the stuff that they talk about Roy Crane and the deal that he was working out with him is just pretty amazing. There's a full page of Wonder Woman strips.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I wanted to show off this one. Oh, I think we're in the early 40s. Silly Symphonies turned into to feature these two Latin American characters as to try and convince the Latin American countries to join the Allied forces during the war. And here's
that was a big part of Roosevelt's foreign policy, the good neighbor policy. So it's interesting that he brought in the comic strips.
Yep. And here's something special. A panel of Uncle Remus, or a whole Sunday of Uncle Remus. Disney doesn't like letting these out of the vault. This may be the only book that you'll see, or recently a recent book that you'll see an Uncle Remus strip published. This is from Song of the South, the characters from that movie that Disney tries to forget happened. And Scamp as well. This is great. This is drawn by Dick Moores. This one.
Yes, it is. Before he took over Gastinelli. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, now we're in the 50s. Well, I think we skipped over the war years.
Oh, did we? No.
I don't. Where did that section start?
Wait, let me.
1935.
It's page 199 in my book.
Oh yeah, there we are. You're right. Comics at War.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool stuff. And yeah, it's great to see just the cultural impact that the war had on everything. Barney Google and Snuffy Smith in the war years.
Exactly.
Amazing. I can't imagine having Snuffy Smith fighting for the country.
No. But no, and I think part of the story that you get from the book is this kind of, this change from the early, rambunctious humor strip with the rise of the story strips, and then also the humor strip itself becomes more sort of suburban, like Blondie in the and more subdued, right? Like it's about like more everyday stuff rather than like these maniac kids with dynamite.
Yeah.
Who are blowing up stuff. But you get a real feel for how things evolve, and you can situate stuff. This is when they brought over Roy Crane, and they made him an offer he couldn't refuse. I think both Crane and Kniff, like, they owned their strips, or owned part of it, and they might have eventually been bought out, but they certainly had that right, and I think that's a big part of the appeal. The King Features, offer them a real stake in the strips, and So this is partially the story of the position of cartoons. But again, look, this is they wanted Kniff and they couldn't get him, and so they got Frank Robbins, right?
Yep. This is Johnny Hazard by Frank Robbins.
Again, Hearst was a thief. He was a poacher. He wanted to, so if Terry the Pirates is doing well, let's hire somebody to draw like Terry and the Pirates.
Yeah, it very much has a Kniff feel to that, with the heavy blocky inking.
Yeah, I know. I mean, this
looks great.
It's. I mean, a lot of cartoonists imitated Kniff, and I think Frank Robbins was one of the best. But yeah, that's definitely I mean, you can kind of tell. I mean, maybe the story is they wanted Kniff and they couldn't quite get him just yet, and so they had Johnny Hazard. Yeah.
This is the stuff we've already looked at here.
Yeah.
Little Iodine.
Mm-hmm.
She's one of the rambunctious characters.
Yes,
that still existed at this time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, really pulling off the pranks. But yeah, no, I mean, like all the stuff, kind of, continued. There's a kind of the teen stuff which really took off in the 50s with the baby boom and the
Yeah, look at that style, that modern 50s modern style.
Yeah,
to all of their clothing, the decorations, and
yeah. And then again, you see the evolution of art. You see like people like Alex Raymond evolving and really like.
Yeah, here's an interesting page here. Look at this. This is Alex Raymond. These are the first two strips that he did, 1946, and then this from 1955.
Yeah.
It's just if you having them side by side, you can see how much his style changed and evolved in his time on Rip Kirby.
No, absolutely, yeah. And I think even if you go back earlier to the 30s Flash Gordon stuff, like he was obviously an artist who was always like evolving, always like trying to like update his style or like do new things, and yeah, you can absolutely see the evolution of that. Yeah, they have a lot of ads, which is I think also interesting. Like the
very cool. Yep.
Yeah, just to give a wider sense or context for all this. And yeah, that's the big thing, right? Like, that was the biggest caper Hirsch pulled off, where like, he convinced Kniff to give up, Terry, which was the great trend. It wasn't the most popular strip, but it was the one that everyone like really read and like it influenced cartoonists, and he convinced them to come over.
Yeah. There he is right there.
Yeah.
A lot of this is reprinted from original art as well, so you get to see a lot of like the paste up pieces, the words falling off and that kind of stuff. So that's cool. And some of it is scans from newspapers.
Yeah.
But it all looks really, really sharp.
That's right. And some of the original art, like with the Harriman, it's watercolored, hand watercolored, and so you get a real diversity of like seeing what the art is like. Beetle Bailey, I mean, again, the 50s with the kind of takeoff of the gag strip, and I think Mort Walker was the last cartoonist that Hearst hired before Hearst died in the early 50s, and the last person that he hired was Mort Walker. So again, if you consider Mort Walker was around not too long ago, so like Hearst, he started with Harriman to Mort Walker. Like that's a whole century of comics right there.
More Steve Canyon. There's a
yes.
lot of Steve Canyon here, which is fine. This is a great page by Frank Goodwin. Godwin, sorry, Frank Godwin. Rusty Riley. This actually, seeing these ones is making me want to pick up those books that Charles Pelto has been putting out.
Yeah, well, like as I keep emphasizing, it's a real sampler book, right? Like you really get.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the change in the humor strips as well, just in the style. We're definitely getting into this, Mort Walker school of cartooning, I like to call it, because all of these strips that started in the 50s have these very stylized round figures, very different from the humor strips that were happening even 10 years before this.
That's right. Yeah, no. Walker really was a big innovator, and that's why I wanted to emphasize, like, Hearst brought him on, so it's the same guy that brought on Jimmy Swimmerton and George Sherman brought on Mort Walker. So we really see, which again I think it says something about Hearst, that he did have a really good eye, and he was very open to like new art. And Hardy Julia again, the 50s with the popularity of the story strip and the soap opera, and again the syndicate they evolved to suit the times.
Yep. There's another composite picture there. Not composite, but cinematic universe.
yeah. The Hearst cinematic universe. Yeah.
Popeye. Archie by Bob Montana.
Yes.
Yep.
It just it's really
Hagar comes into the scene.
Yeah.
Some Al Williamson. This is such great stuff here.
Yeah. And again, if you want to make the connections, you can clearly see the influence of Alex Raymond on him,
Absolutely.
and also like Kniff, with some of the blacks, and so you can definitely see how art evolves and how artists are looking at other artists, and like all these other guys. You're right, Mort Walker had a huge influence, and like all these like subsequent humor strips, they're kind of done in that Walker style. Like it's had such a big impact. Sam and Silo. And now, even now, Happy Hooligan is now drawn. He's not drawn the way he was in like 1905.
Nope,
He's
that's
drawn,
in a Mort Walker style. I mean, this was
Mort.
Mort
Yeah.
and Jerry Dumas. Oh boy, some more Disney. Disney had so many comic strips over the years. This is a sample from their Christmas strips. That,
I actually remember those when they printed newspapers. Every year there'd be like a kind of Disney Christmas story, and yeah.
This one I love, Quincy. I'd love to see a collection of this.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. No, the yeah. I think some of the more recent stuff. When we talk about what's been reprinted, what hasn't. Yeah, a lot of the 60s and 70s stuff hasn't been, and there's probably like, again, there's like there hasn't been reprinted in the kind of Library of America format of like really doing a kind of comprehensive stuff. Like some of it has, but a lot of it hasn't.
This one has. We did the Popeye by Bobby London.
Yeah. Which is
very
a great
stuff. And I like how this this book in the last chapter here, talking about the New Age, we have a sampling of strips from the 90s and 2000s, and with a big focus on Mutts, which is understandable because I think Mutts is such a throwback comic strip itself.
Yeah, so. One that often like pays homage to Harriman. McConnell did that great book on Harriman, and to other like classic cartoonists. I mean, he really knows his history.
It's great, yeah.
In
fact, there's one strip in here that, if I don't know if we'll come across it. That is there's a Harriman reference in the Mutts comic.
Yeah, which again, really helps tie everything together.
Some great stuff. I love Bizarro.
Yeah.
They kind of don't spend as much time in the later years as they do with the early years in the book, which I think is kind of understandable. I mean, I think in another 30 years or 40 years, people will be doing more complex essays on the happenings of the 80s, 90s, and 2000s.
Yeah. No, it's a little bit too close to us now, and but I think I think Brian Walker, who's has some essays in here, he's really like been making the case for more recent comics, and he's he did that book, The Comics Since 1945, which really tries to tell this story and gives a lot of attention to the more recent work. Yeah, so and he's
Piranha Club. This one was also called Ernie. I like this strip. It was irreverent and funny.
Yeah, and again, a kind of a great kind of throwback to that sort of Happy Hooligan days, because it's really about these kind of like low down crooks and conmen and no, it's and Zippy. I mean, Zippy is such an interesting kind of note to end on, because it's such a but again, also rooted in the history. Like there's been a lot of Zippy stories where he goes back and he sees William Randolph Hearst, right? There's a great storyline like that.
There's a great list of books in the back here, out of date because this book is already several years old, but all of the stuff that has been recently printed, not just from the Library of American Comics, but other King Features books if you want to go and pick it up.
Yeah, no, it's a great I mean, one would hope if they ever republish this book or update it, you can have an updated list. But
I love these end papers.
Yeah,
the end papers that it just look like a comic page.
Yeah. Which again, yeah, gives you that reading experience and gives you. I want to emphasize this that like there's other books like the Annie books that I do or the Walton Skisics that are about a particular cartoonist, but this really gives you the whole feel of comics. And so if you're someone who's a fan of the genre of the form, this is a great book.
It really is. Yeah. So okay, hold on. Let's see if we get caught up in the comments here. Pui says this is a great book. I read it just a page or so a night last year so that I could savor the art.
Yeah.
That's very restrained of you. Just a page or so a night. But that's fantastic. Yeah, there's just I can't believe there's so much packed into this one volume. And it's such an interesting look at comic history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm really glad that it did. I think it's a real. I want to say tribute not just to King Features, but I think also to Dean himself. That
yes.
he kind of like the Library of America. He's edited so many books, and so much of what he's done is sampled here, where the Polly and her pals, and Bringing Up Father, and Little King, and Steve Canyon. So you get a kind of Flash Gordon. You get a little glimpse of all the different things that Dean has worked on.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of them, but many of them.
So if you pick it up if you haven't already. It's such a great addition to your library. Even if you are like, well, I'd rather have like a complete collection. Some of these strips are never going to see a complete collection, so it's just great to have something in print that shares some of these obscure strips that people haven't heard of, as well as alongside the great ones that everybody knows and loves. It's such a
and like the Smithsonian book, it could inspire someone. Like there could be someone who picks this book up and says like, "Wow, I'm gonna make a book of all of these."
Yeah,
which that happened with the Smithsonian book. Right? That's why we have Walton Skisic, because like Chris Ware and I both saw Gastinelli and thought like, well, this has to be collected.
Nice, yeah, brilliant. So that's a good segue. We should probably start wrapping up here, but to tell us, what are you working on coming up in the future? More Walton Skisics?
Yeah, Walton Skisic is still going on. Where like it takes a while to do those books just because they're very research heavy. Like if people have read them, they'll know like I do like an introduction that really ties Frank King to his life to the strip. He's a very autobiographical cartoonist, and so we always have to go through a lot of letters. But yeah, there'll be future volumes of that. There's gonna be a show at the Boston College of like alternative comics. So I'll be writing about that, about Hernandez brothers and Chris Ware, and so yeah, there's always a lot of work to do.
Fantastic. Where can people find you online? Is there anything you'd want to tell us about there?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I have a fairly well-known Twitter account. It's my name but backwards. Here, Jeet.
Perfect. Okay, well, I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thanks, Jeet, for being part of our show. I had a great time walking through this book with you, hearing your stories, hearing you talk about this, Hearst himself and this long period of history. Yeah, what a great time. So thanks for being on the show, and I hope we can have you.
I really liked it. Yeah, and I hope people take a look at the book if they haven't already. It's a great book.
And I think I'd love to have you back on the show again. We can probably talk about Polly and her pals or something like
Annie.
that. Or Annie, yeah. Well, any one of those books that you've worked on, I would love to do another show. So we'll see you in the future.
Yes.
But otherwise, thank you everybody for watching. Don't forget about us online, LOA Comics. You can find us online or go to libraryofamericancomics.com to see all about the books, including this one. Yeah. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. And to get us out of this, we're going to have our theme song. See you later.